And it looks like we're live, or at least I'm live. Hello, everybody. Still getting set up here. Ron will not be joining us tonight. I'll give you a little more detail about that later. Doug should be here momentarily. So if we've got anyone in chat, I got a few fun little topics. Who's here? I'm not going to just talk to myself and not know who I'm talking to, but there are some really fun topics going on. Hey, Chris. What's going on, buddy? Let's see. We got some fun stuff. Hey, we got Smirk here too. How you doing, buddy? For those of you who are joining late or watching this on replay, you're going to want to fast forward about 12 minutes. That's when we jump into the Constitution stuff, generally. In the meantime, I'm going to try to make up a monologue or try to keep everyone entertained. It was felt like the old OJ in the Suburban with every single news channel watching the Trump motorcade going in to get arraigned. And of course, the media decided to blast everywhere. Trump was arrested. Well, that's usually what happens when you get indicted. So it wasn't the major news, but they overhyped it, made it seem worse than it was. So they got a lot of their clickbait. Hey, Tracy. No Ron today. Probably no Ron next week. He's having eye surgery, if you don't know. Hey, Michelle. So he's actually having major eye surgery. So he will be laid out for a couple of weeks. So we'll do thoughts and prayers for him later once everyone gets here. Doug will be here. He's going to try to get here early. Yeah, you're right, Raging Spark. It's a nothing burger, but well, I'm going to give you some fun detail about how much of a nothing burger it is. I just got a little bit of one of the guys I followed who does a lot of great research. Just really blew out how stupid this case is. But I'm going to hold my thunder for another few minutes on that one, just because I don't want to repeat it later. I think everyone wants to hear this one. Real quick, I'm going to make sure Doug has the invite on his phone in case he's stuck in traffic. So let me do that real quick. Other fun stuff going on. See, Donald Trump Jr. tweeted out earlier that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Stormy Daniels owes Donald J. Trump another $130,000. This is in addition to the $500,000 she already owed him. Came out today, interesting timing. I think it's kind of interesting that it came out of the Ninth Circuit Court, which used to be the most left-leaning circuit court of them all, and that's out here in California. And it's now, with all the Trump judicial appointments, it's pretty much a 50-50 court. So if you get the right judge, we've had a lot of good rulings come out of the Ninth Circuit. And what it really has done is it's slowed down the legislative assault on the Constitution we're getting out of the West Coast states. They've gotten pushed back on some of their stuff several times. It's not a perfect court by any stretch, but we got a Trump win out of the Ninth Circuit. You would never could have seen that happening 5 years ago. All right, I'm going to do a screen share on this, and I'll repeat it for people that are late because this is too good to wait on. Bear with me. So if you thought the indictment was bad before, have I got news for you? So this is from a Twitter user named Dawson's Field. Did some checking, and after they released the indictment today, it says the first 4 charges placed the president in New York committing the crimes on February 14, 2017. Yet Comey's memos placed Trump in the White House at Washington, D.C. He wasn't even there. He wasn't in New York. Dawson goes on to document the next count is on March 16th or 17th. Next counts are on March 17th. Trump was also in the White House. So literally, we can go down through this whole indictment, and almost every single time Trump is in Washington, D.C., not New York City. Which begs the question, if Trump's not even in D.C., even New York City, how does the local district attorney have any jurisdiction whatsoever? And I don't think he does. It's also been pointed out to me that he wasn't even in charge of the Trump organization while he was president of the United States. Someone else was doing that. So even if they wanted to charge the Trump organization for bad bookkeeping, which is basically what the charge is, you can't go for Trump in for a criminal charge when he wasn't in charge of the company. You know, he had nothing to do with it. You have to charge whoever was the CEO for doing the bookkeeping. So as bad as this case seemed like before we got to see the indictment, it's far worse, if that makes sense. But you just literally the jurisdiction thing ought to this thing should be tossed out immediately. You can't charge a guy for a crime in New York that was committed on a day when you weren't in New York. It just can't do it. I mean, and if we're going to say it crossed state lines, he did some kind of wire fraud, well, that becomes a federal offense. And the feds already refused to even touch this case. Now, the fun part is, what's the guy's name? Colangelo? It's some guy with a 4-digit Italian name who worked for the DOJ. Just sort of ended up working for Alvin Bragg at the Manhattan DA's office here in the last 6 months. And I guess that's where the push came from. Yeah, it's a waste of time and money. It seems like the Democrat Party is a little ticked off at Bragg. Some people are suggesting Bragg went off the reservation because it's such a bad political move to make Trump look like a martyr. And you can see his ratings are going up, going through the roof. DeSantis is dropping, Trump's going up. Trump's, getting new donors and raking in more campaign contributions. And the whole thing looks like it backfired. So why did Bragg do it when most of the Democrat Party are saying he shouldn't do it? If the case blows up, it makes the other cases they're going after Trump for even weaker. And it seems like we have a bit of a split. When the Democrat Party isn't messaging consistently, because these guys stick together like you wouldn't believe. They always stay on message. But they're not doing that this time. There's a split. And I think Bragg may have gone off the reservation. He saw the media distancing themselves, saying it's possibly a weaker case. And maybe perhaps, pointing out some of the jurisdictional issues. You see George Soros distancing himself. You see them running cover for Soros. Oh, you're anti-Semitic. What I love about that is was it Sheldon Adelson was a big Republican donor. And, the Democrats spent a decade, yelling about him, but that was an anti-Semitic, saying, his money was buying politics. The same thing Soros does. But it's anti-Semitic if you do it to a Democrat donor, apparently. So these people are ridiculous. But anyways, I thought that little tweet thread by Dawson's Field was really good. I mean, you just can't charge someone for a crime if they're not there. What else do we got going on today? Let me read the chat real quick. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to listen to Bragg talking today very much. He does seem like a bit of a bozo. He's been audited by the IRS. Yeah, well, I think this Bragg guy just committed his own political suicide. We'll see what happens with that. Of course, when you're a loyal Democrat, that just means you won't hold any more office. He'll retire to some cush job at some nice little left-leaning law firm, Perkins Coie, what have you. Ron tells me he's going to be doing one last show tonight, him and Gordon, on his Untold History channel. And the topic is going to be, apparently they have some DOD documents that shows they knew about COVID 3 months before anyone else did. And it looks like it traces the origins back to Ukraine. And since it came from a DOD document, I'm not concerned about getting a strike on YouTube for it. But anyways, watch Ron's show tonight. They're going to be talking about that. I haven't had a chance to go into a ton of detail. But if you remember, the Xi Jinping on basically day one, he was blaming the origin of the virus on the American military. And when we found out about the biolabs in Ukraine, 34 of them that we originally denied and then admitted they were there and then tried to make excuses for them, I started to be open to, where exactly was the origin of this man-made virus. So lots of fun stuff going on. Oh, in the meantime, Has anybody talked about the Joe Biden classified documents lately? Well, a few people are, and well, let's just say that it looks like there may be some movement on that case relatively soon. So expect more distracting stories to get us talking about anything but Joe Biden. China, right, Tracy? So Trump blames it on China from day one. He's usually well informed. He got most of the things right about that whole incident, but was he wrong about China? Or was China involved with the U.S. government in Ukraine? And the Chinese had really close ties with Ukraine prior to COVID and all that. If you guys know your history, the Silk Road of China always went through what used to be Khazaria, and then which is now Ukraine. So that's always been the gateway to Europe for the Great Silk Road. And that was happening again over the last 5-10 years. Is a lot of Chinese goods were being shipped through Ukraine to get to Europe. So China was close. They were closely connected to Ukraine. So there could be, I don't think we have the answer to that mystery yet, but maybe we'll get there. Should have had it already if the WHO did their job, but they're too busy trying to take away our national sovereignty. That WHO quote unquote treaty, if you read that thing, it's just an absolute disaster. They basically want the ability to lock down U.S. states at the command from the WHO, and that's not just for real threats, but also for perceived threats. If they think there's a possible risk, they can lock us down. And yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that Joe Biden will sign that, because that's what he does. He just gives away our country's sovereignty. And that one's pretty scary. I mean, obviously it's unconstitutional. You can't have a global organization making sovereign decisions in the United States. Although I did a video a while back explaining how the Bank of International Settlements did exactly that after the financial crisis. Our DOJ basically said BIS rules superseded U.S. law and did not charge Goldman Sachs and the like. That was in 2011. At the time, I called that like the fourth coup of the United States. That's pretty bad when an international organization trumps American sovereignty. But that's what's going on there. Anybody here from North Carolina? Really good news out of North Carolina today. Oops, let me add Doug. Hey, Douglas.
I made it.
You did. Hey, I had one quick last story, a real quick one. You may even want to comment on it. But apparently there's a state senator in North Carolina, Democrat, who switched parties today to give the Republicans a supermajority so they can override the veto of the Democratic governor. So that just happened today, and that's kind of a big deal. And my question is, if North Carolina is such a red state, what are they doing with a Democrat governor? But
well, I mean, there's a number of states where that's going on, where they've got a conservative legislature and a Democrat governor. That's I hadn't heard that. That's interesting. Overriding a veto, if you've got a supermajority, is a big deal. That's the reason why here in California we always talk about getting a Republican governor. Well, a Republican governor though would be completely, I mean, it's like a one of the 8 or 9 Republicans in the state assembly here in California. Not that I'm giving up or pessimistic, but they have no power. If the veto could be overridden.
Perhaps we ought to do something about that. I don't know, maybe something Reynolds v. Sims related.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. This is North Carolina.
Yeah.
North Carolina has always been considered a purple state. They kind of right there on the. What's funny is Oregon is considered, though, a dark blue state. But as I was commenting the other day, if you look at the legislature, the state House of Representatives is evenly split 30-30. And the state Senate is 21 Democrats, 19 Republicans.
We're talking North Carolina?
Aside from the fact that they've got a Democrat governor, how is it that Oregon's so deep blue?
Oh, Oregon. Gotcha. Well, we know how that happens. Going back to North Carolina, obviously they've been in the news lately because of Moore v. Harper. The big story today is that judicial election in Wisconsin. We got a leftist judge versus apparently a conservative one. And the assumption is if the leftist wins, someone's gonna challenge very quickly the court decision from 2020 that bans drop-off boxes. That being said, if Moore v. Harper comes in like we thought it does and returns the time, place, and manner of elections back to the legislature, and Wisconsin's got a red legislature, this election might be a bit moot. Not quite as big of a deal as they're making it.
Now,
at least as far as drop boxes go.
Here's the funny thing about that. And when I say this, people get a little perturbed. Some people, not you people, my friends, but other people. And basically, what I'm going to bring up here is in the Constitution. Hi, everybody, by the way. In the Constitution, it's very interesting the way it's worded. It's Article 1, Section 4. If you want to go there with me real quick. Oh, stop it.
I was wondering what that noise was.
Yeah, my white dog and brown dog decided that they wanted to be in the office with me. And the white dog, if you give him too much food, he starts snorting on it. And so you can hear him snorting. Virginia calls him a princess. She thinks that I treat him too nicely and he's become a princess out of it. But anyway, it says the times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Doesn't say by law. It doesn't say by the legislature and the governor. It says by the legislature.
It was Article 1.
And when you get to Article 2, when it comes to the, once again, this is a federal election, but the same principles should hold true at the state level. Then when it talks about the electors in Article 2, Section 1, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So did you notice that in both cases, it doesn't say by law and the governor's not included? So how is it the government can veto any election decisions made by the legislature? The founding fathers kept the governor out of the process on purpose. You don't trust executives. And so the very fact that this is a consideration, when it comes to election law, now this is going to, no, the governor's not supposed to be involved in election law. It's up to the legislature, period.
Doesn't say anything about the state Supreme Court either.
This is true. The courts have no business being involved as well. It's all up to the legislature on purpose. So when you talk about this story about North Carolina, when it comes to election law, that shouldn't matter.
Before you got here, I talked about there's a really great Twitter account from a guy that goes by Dawson's Field. And he read through the indictment that was, released today, which was ridiculous. Basically, every ledger.
34 counts of basic misdemeanors that have somehow been warped into federal.
Yeah, and each one is just writing a check, entering a journal into a ledger. Those are 2 felonies right there. Those 2 acts.
Okay.
Well, what Dawson's Field pointed out was the indictment alleges that Trump was in New York for each of these things. This is all 2017. And it turns out that they can document that Trump was in D.C. the entire time. They even showed documentation from the Mueller report where Trump was. They knew, we have Trump's whereabouts known. They were so sloppy, they're charging him for committing a crime in New York when it's provable that he wasn't in New York. He also wasn't the head of the Trump organization at the time. So if the organization was cooking their books, which is what's being alleged, and Trump's not involved in the organization, how can he be accused of criminal activity? So you've got jurisdictional issues up the wazoo, and if this thing will never go to trial, if this is not dismissed, every judge who looks at it needs to be disbarred.
Dershowitz said that a freshman in law school could defend Trump and win easily.
Mm-hmm. And that's before we saw how bad the indictment actually was. I read through the whole thing over the last hour or two, and it was laughable. And but I wanted your opinion on. How does a Manhattan district attorney charge someone for a crime in New York, charge someone who wasn't in New York, And that means it crossed state lines, which automatically makes it a federal crime. So it's none of his darn business. And the feds already said no to the case. Yeah, I just think this one's dead. I think this is dead on arrival. It never.
It's dead on arrival as long as the judge actually acts like an apolitical judge. The problem is we have a judge who is a documented Trump hater, and his daughter worked for the Kamala Harris campaign.
Oh, she did more than that. More stuff came out on her today.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she was involved in some of the other Trump persecutions, but I think she was a staffer. I want to say it was for McCabe or someone like that, but I'd have to go back and find
it. And right now it's at a place where it would be impossible, of course, anywhere in the country would be impossible, but to get a non-biased, jury. But in this particular case, it's a 1% registered Republican area and 12% voted for Trump. The overwhelmingly other, for Biden. So this is a very lopsided place with a very lopsided judge with a very lopsided case that is unprovable unless, of course, shenanigans are afoot. And we'll see. But I'm siding with you. They know. But here's the thing. Here's what I think. I think they know it's going nowhere. They did it for the mugshot and for the accusation. The mugshot, by the way, is probably going to be brought to you on T-shirts throughout the leftist sphere really soon. And the accusation, when it comes to left, what we know is it doesn't matter if someone's guilty or found guilty or whatever. All that matters is the accusation. If there's enough accusations, people believe it. People believe this is a legitimate case. People believe that Stormy Daniels' part of it is actually legitimate. People believe that Trump actually said racist things and that he's a white supremacist. They believe all kinds of stuff. All you have to do is be as accused. And for the left, that's all it takes to get away with something.
Yeah, and before we jump onto the Constitution, speaking of Stormy, a decision came out of the Ninth Circuit today that Stormy owes Donald Trump another $130,000 in legal fees and such. Came out today.
Yeah, she owes him.
Yeah. And yet he's being accused. Yeah, let's go. Move on.
Yeah, Stephanie, by the way, hi, good to see you in the chat room. You came up in conversation last night and today, actually. I've got apparently all kinds of Michigan-raised folks in my Constitution classes in Fallbrook and Chino that grew up there. And when I mentioned that you would like to see me get out there to Michigan, they said, if you go, I go with you. I'll show you all the places to see and da-da-da-da-da. So I mentioned Stephanie by first name that, she's would like to see me out there in Michigan. And like I said, my two of my Michigan peeps that in my classes are like, one of them, I guess she spent her whole life there. She's telling me where she used to hang out in high school and a whole bit where family's at. But anyway, so there you go. Good to see you guys. Good to see everybody. It is just Brady and I, as so.
Yeah, real quick, everyone.
Sorry, we're only getting 2/3 of the insanity today.
Yeah, real quick, everyone.
What was that?
We will not have Ron this week or next. He is going in for a major, I think it's a detached retina surgery. He will spend the next 2 weeks laying face down as his eye heals. And so he's in for a rough couple spells. So if anybody wants to send him prayers and thoughts, I think he'd appreciate that. But that is why we have no Ron Partain today.
Yeah, we are still in the legislative prohibitions.
Should be Article 1, Section 9.
Yeah, should be habeas corpus, right?
Exactly. We finished slavery last week.
All right. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for being here. I've got a lot of folks that said they're going to start watching this because they don't get a chance to come to my classes or whatnot, and I point on them in this direction. So we'll see. I wonder if we'll see a few new faces in the chat or not. The Patriot Soapbox show for the Republic on Sunday nights, where we're going through the Federalist Papers, has been a hit. Patriot Soapbox's website, for whatever reason, was not available that night, but it was shut down. I don't know why. It was people couldn't get into it, but DLive.tv PSP, which stands for Patriot Soapbox. That's how you really go watch the show. And so if you want to watch on Sunday nights between 5 and 7 Pacific with Alan Myers holding on to the reins, and Brady and I sitting in the compartment of the stagecoach as Alan drives the stagecoach forward on the road, and we talk about the Federalist Papers, the anti-Federalist Papers, and it's a good show. I enjoy being a part of it. Be aware that at the very beginning, we don't just jump into the Federalist Papers. There is Alan's Wackadoodle News, which is wackadoodle, but what's interesting is it always seems to find a way into the constitutional conversation. All of it, almost all of it. It is quite fascinating. So I wanted to plug those real quick for y'all so that you're aware. Also, I was accused today of wearing a pink shirt. This is not pink. It is salmon. I stand by that story, and I'm not going to budge. All right.
I'm not sure salmon's not a worse color than pink.
Yeah, every once in a while, rare occasions, I'll wear this shirt, and I always get a bunch of comments about it. I'm like, what? It's, after one of my favorite fish to eat, salmon. All right, so
I'm wearing pink next week. Real men can wear pink, Doug. It's okay.
Real men can wear pink.
Hey, what can I say? I'm an 80s guy. That was big back then.
Yeah, actually it was. Yeah, I actually now I'm gonna give something away. So in high school, junior high and high school, 7th grade, I was a complete bully fodder. So the 8th and 9th grade, I decided to hang around with some tough kids. Punk came out, and I said I'd get into punk. I like the music anyway, and me and the punkers hung out with each other, and everybody left me alone. Then when I got to high school, 10th grade, we had 3-year junior high, 3-year high schools back then. And got 10th grade, 11th grade, I was a total metalhead, and I was into Metallica and stuff like that. But my senior year, I decided to go preppy. Are you ready for it? The outfit I loved to wear the most was these kind of purplish corduroy pants with a white button-down shirt with purple stripes on it, a purple sock tie, and a violet Le Tigre sweater vest, and purplish penny loafers. And when I tell people that, they go, "Oh my gosh, you!" Senior year, I got kind of preppy.
I usually had an alligator or a polo guy on my shirt back then, but I didn't get quite as bold as you did.
Yeah, that was my thing, and then I got in the Navy after that. All right, after high school.
Let's get into the Constitution.
Let's get into the Constitution. Enough of this silliness. All right, so for those of you following along and paying attention and keeping notes and keeping score, Article 1, Section 9 of your pocket Constitution, Article 1, Section 9 online of your Constitution, and Article 1, Section 9, the very first paragraph is about the getting rid of the Atlantic slave trade, basically. And that's what we talked about last week. So you go to the second paragraph, and it says, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus should not be suspended. Stop there. I won't go to the next part just yet. What is habeas corpus? It is Latin for present the body. What it means is whenever there is this is going to be a proper word for the times, an indictment, and someone cannot just sit in jail and rot and wait. They have to have their speedy trial. They have to have, in other words, you deserve your day in court. Due process must be applied. You must be presented to the courts for your due process. That's what habeas corpus is. It's saying here that the privilege is not a right, it's a privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended. Now, there's a caveat here that's added. Unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Now, this is an interesting one. As citizens, we have our due process due to us. We have a right to our day in court. We have a right to our due process. They cannot they cannot deprive from us our life, liberty, or property without due process. 14th Amendment and Fifth Amendment. So, if your opportunity, your access to that due process is to be blocked, then it has to be because the public safety is in danger, because you are a part of a rebellion or an invasion that places that in danger. Here's the problem with that. It's a good clause, but here's the problem. Well, what do you mean by rebellion or invasion? Well, it can be defined any way the government wants, right?
There you go. And
that's the problem.
That's a giant loophole. You could hold anybody as long as you want and say, hey, that might have been an insurrection.
Yeah.
Now we've had a habeas corpus. This clause basically misused and abused twice in history. Once was during the Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and he
specifically with Maryland rebellious people.
And basically, he said it was a rebellion when the South left. No, it wasn't. They seceded. And of course, we know what happened on that certain date in the first month of January 21. And they decided to call it the I word. And that's how they're justifying the basically locking these people up without any kind of due process. So what do we do about that?
So we go to the courts, we complain, and the courts say, you don't have standing.
Yeah, it's a bit of an issue. I'm glad you pointed out that it's problematic the way this is written. And it's, if we ever get to our constitutional convention, we may want to have we may want to rethink the wording in this clause.
If I were to have, it's funny because the idea of an Article 5 convention came up. In fact, last night, I was introduced to someone who runs a very, very, very large group in Orange County. I won't use names necessarily, but she and I were on the phone last night. And there's another young lady who's, and I say young respectively about this young lady, who is encouraging me to get the news about the case against Kamala Harris out there more. And she's even willing to spearhead an effort to have a bunch of ladies calling into conservative talk shows on the radio, like Hannity and Charlie Kirk and all that, to get the word out. And so she encouraged me and gave me the contact information for this person I was talking to yesterday. And in the conversations regarding the Constitution and the case, she says, well, whether or not I talk to you depends on where you stand on the con. Well, the moment she said that, the way she said it, I knew where she stood. And I want people to understand that, first of all, Article 5 convention is not a con. Con stands for Constitutional Convention. There was one, 1787. It wrote a new constitution. That should be the only con. However, I do believe that it's important that we utilize an Article 5 convention as a tool. Now, that said, as I explained to her, I am not necessarily in line with certain people like Mark Meckler pushing the Convention of States in the sense that this is the only solution and that's the only way we fix this. It's a very, very important tool. I agree. It's a very good tool. It's not the only tool. And I believe that it would work with a number of other tools. The other thing, and the whole point to this is people who call it a con tend to be members of things like John Birch Society and Eagle Forum. And I'm glad that they're scared to death of it, I tell people. So that when we have one, they will make sure that it is. That it operates on the rules that it's supposed to, that it doesn't become a quote unquote runaway convention. Now, the reason why I bring all that up is one of the things that I would want in this Article 5 convention is exactly what Brady brought up: clarification of some of this language. Let's put a full definition of what is meant there by the term invasion, rebellion, or the other I word, insurrection. Or maybe have a clarification and definition entered into the Constitution on what it means when we talk about natural born citizen, or is judicial review truly a constitutional concept, and so on and so forth. So I think an Article 5 convention is not only something that we need to have, not only because I'd like to see the 17th Amendment and the 16th Amendment repealed, but I would like to see a clarification of language. Oh, and then there's this one other amendment that I think ought to be proposed. You may have heard of it, Brady. It's named after you, or at least originally was. You've since changed the name, I think.
Oh, yeah. I think I called it Citizens United in the video.
Citizens United. Now, the question is, how did the Founding Fathers define an insurrection? This is Stephanie's question. Was it against the government representatives or the Constitution? Well, at first, I'm going to kind of confuse you, because the answer is it depends on who you were talking to. If you're talking Alexander Hamilton, well, he would be in full agreement with today's ruling class. Well, if you dare even speak out against the government, that's insurrection. In fact, on that presidency, full of members of Hamilton Federalist Party, actually passed a sedition act that made it, you pay a fine and spend time in jail if you wrote or spoke out directly against the administration, the government. But from the other founding fathers, insurrection was against the rule of law, the system itself. In other words, the Constitution. And in fact, that definition emerges in the 14th Amendment. In the 14th Amendment, where it talks about, how there are people that won't be able to hold office if they commit insurrection against what? Against the Constitution. So if the Constitution is the thing that insurrection is all about, then a government that is constitutional, moving against that, would be insurrection. But what about a government that's not constitutional? What about a government that refuses to follow the principles of the Constitution? Is that insurrection? Well, wait a second. But in the Declaration of Independence, it says that we have the right and the duty to alter or abolish despotic government. A despotic government would be one that's not following the Constitution, that has turned its back on the rule of law, turned its back on all of this. So insurrection, from a founder's point of view, based on what I've seen, would be against the Constitution and against a government that is abiding by the Constitution. Otherwise, it's not insurrection, it's duty.
But they didn't use the word insurrection, they used the word rebellion. And it's
They didn't use the word rebellion.
And it's a slightly different definition. Invasion to the public safety. Now, we could have a conversation about that. When they were talking about the illegal immigrants and kids in cages, wait a minute, this is an invasion. They do not have rights. They're habeas corpus and due process. They have no rights of due process whatsoever. That was always, that being said, I'm not going to jump
about the illegal aliens and so forth. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not going, we're close enough to Article 5 that I'll save my thunder on and a lot of my opinions on that, because when we get to it, I'll have a lot to say. But suffice it to say, I think it is the only tool that was given to us to rein in an out of control central government. And I think it's such an important tool. They gave us one tool and we've never used it in 240 years, which is a mistake. I think we ought to have one every 10 years. And
well, I think there are other tools that work in harmony with it, such as nullification, such as a convention for the purpose of auditing the federal government and then determining what to nullify, which Madison talks about in Federalist Paper number 49. So there are other tools that I think are also important. Do they all perch on the same branch with equal standing? Not necessarily. And it depends on the situation, I suppose. So while I am not taking away from what you're saying about an Article 5 convention being a very important tool, and perhaps you may be right that it should be used very often, and we've not used it at all. Although there's been a couple of times in history where the applications for an Article 5 convention began to go out. The 11th Amendment, for example, they were preparing for an Article 5 convention for that, and federal Congress saw what was going on, decided to propose the amendment themselves before the convention could be called.
Yeah, last thing I wanted is for the states to be making law themselves. But it's just big picture. We have 7 articles in the Constitution, and we've used 6 of them. We've completely ignored one for 240 years. How much sense does that make? And that's how we got to where we are. You got to use the whole Constitution. But we decided to say, skip that one. It's an important tool. It needs to be discussed.
And this argument that, well, Doug, it'll be runaway, because the bad guys will stick their finger. The bad guys are sticking their fingers in everything. If that's your excuse for not doing it, then do nothing.
Well,
know what happens when you do nothing? The end comes. It's like the biblical concept of the city, and the armies are marching around the city. And if a city does not resist, we know what happens, right? So, not that I'm, very emotionally emphatic about such things. Anyway, all right. So, privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when the case of rebellion or invasion of public safety may require it. The next line, no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. Now, let's break this down. Bill of attainder. First of all, this is in what article? Article 1. If you remember, we've talked about this. Article 1 establishes the legislative branch. Article 2 establishes the executive branch. Article 3 establishes the judicial branch. So this is in Article 1. So we're talking about the legislative branch. And if we're talking about the legislative branch and something has the word bill in it, what does that mean? A bill is a piece of legislation. It is a legislative instrument. So it says no bill of attainder. So in other words, saying no legislative instrument of a nature that is whatever attainder is. Okay, so what's attainder? If you look up attainder and you spend some time studying it, attainder, or to be attainted, is to be punished. An attainder is punishment. So it says no bill of attainder shall be passed by the federal Congress. No bill of attainder shall be passed. Bill, piece of legislation. Attainder, punishment. It is not saying that the Congress cannot decide what the punishment should be on something. We know that's the truth because in Article 3, when it comes to Article 3, Section 3, when it talks about treason, it says Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason. So we know that they can indicate in their bills, their pieces of legislation, what the punishment should be, what it is. So then what does it mean? No piece of legislation that attains, gives punishment. It means that they can't act judicially. Well, go back, you watch enough TV, right? You got you got the courtroom, and you got the judge, you got the audience, you got the jury, and you got your plaintiff, and you got your defendant, you got the lawyers, and the jury comes out, and we find the defendant to be guilty. Who does the sentencing? The judge. The punishment is given by the courts. It is not given by the legislature. The legislature can say what it should be, ought to be, is. The punishment for treason, for example, according to legislation, is death, but the death is not put into place. It is not attainted. Attainder is not put upon a person except through due process, which means by the courts. What this does is this avoids punishment without due process. You have your day, and going back to the habeas corpus thing, you have the right to your day in court. Go ahead. What do you got here?
Just giving you your definition of attainder. It's rather interesting. The judgment of death or sentence of a competent tribunal upon a person convicted of treason or felony, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much exactly what you just said. So you got it right, of course. I was just backing you up with a little 1828 Webster's Dictionary action.
Hey, it's always nice when a reference agrees with me. But I just want people to understand this is not to say that the legislature can't say, well, the punishment ought to be this, or that we've decided is it this, but the actual giving of that punishment has to be the courts. Why? Because the courts give it after something else, due process. Legislature is not going to give you due process. This is to avoid punishment by a body of a bunch of politicians without you receiving your due process. That's really what it's about. Because what was happening with the British is the Parliament would decide you're guilty. Wouldn't you need to go to courts? Or when they did do the courts, sometimes they would do something called admiralty courts. What this is when the British would not allow a jury and they would appoint their own judge. And what that did was that, because part of the problem was you've got these tax laws going on, like the Stamp Act, stuff like that. Well, you can't have any product from outside the colonies unless it's been properly taxed. In order for it to be properly taxed, it has to go through the British government. Typically, it has to be a British product. If you have any product that's outside that, why, you are a smuggler. You're guilty. Then these people would be found guilty. They'd go to court, and then the juries of the colonists would say, he's not guilty. The British had a problem. They could not convict people of their laws because a jury trial kept going against them because the colonists were going to stand with the colonists. So they pulled out jury trials and they put their own hanging judges in there, and they let the judge be the jury and executioner, so to speak.
Magistrates, they called them.
Admiralty courts, and that's what we're trying to. That's what the founders are trying to avoid here, is that kind of misuse. In this case, the Parliament, or in our case, a Congress, cannot punish as a court would with sentencing with just a piece of legislation, no bill of attainder. So legislation can say this is the punishment, but the punishment cannot be given unless it goes through the court system, because you're entitled to your due process. No bill of attainder.
So let's talk about ex post facto a bit. We've got people out there trying to say that we're going to now make laws, federal laws, which of course are unconstitutional, to make an AR-15 or other quote unquote assault weapons illegal. But if I purchase one when it's legal, and then you make a law for it to be illegal, you can't take it away from me. That would be
right. It's ex post facto. Yeah,
exactly. That's a conversation that's going to be coming. This concept's going to come up a lot this year.
I hope it does, because you know what? There's a lot of these gun laws and other laws that come up where they violate this ex post facto, and nobody does argue. And then when I've taken this argument to a couple of Second Amendment lawyers, I say, how come you don't use this argument? Oh, it would never stand in court. But it's in the Constitution. But case law.
I got no words. If the Constitution doesn't stand up in the court, then the courts are outside the Constitution and therefore ought to be null and void.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, we've seen.
All right, so ex post facto, what that means is after the fact. No retroactive law of any kind. I remember California, and I can't remember what year this was. It was prior to the scare, the thing that resulted in us having to wear certain things on our faces and get poked at. And it was before that. And California had passed a tax, but made it retroactive to the prior January. And ex post facto shows up in both Article 1, Section 9 and Article 1, Section 10. In other words, the federal government nor the state governments may do it. And I was screaming up one side and down the other. I had people I knew in Sacramento say, hey, this is unconstitutional, ex post facto. And they had never heard of that clause. They were stunned when I brought it up to them.
That's
Of
kind of
course,
stunning.
it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It matters what a bunch of judges said, right? Go ahead.
That's stunning to me. I knew what ex post facto meant when I was in junior high or high school. It's not exactly an uncommon term.
The fact is, these knuckleheads are swearing up and down. They didn't know that they can't make, by law anyway, legally, ex post facto law. And when I qualified that, they can make it because they do make it because they're a bunch of tyrants. That's what tyrants do.
Yeah, that's one of the more.
We've got to figure out. Go ahead.
That's one of the more frightening stories you've ever told me. People would not know that was the case.
Yeah, but I didn't even know what it was. And these are office holders.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. All righty. Next one is quite a conversation, very interesting conversation. And it goes back to Article 1, Section 8 with the very first clause where it talks about Congress having the authority to tax. But this goes with it. So while Congress can tax, the federal government can tax, there are only certain, or originally anyway, certain taxations that were allowed. What this says is no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. So no direct taxation, and if there's direct taxation, it has to be tied to the population somehow, the census. And now understand, when it says no capitation or other direct tax, it's not just talking about you as an individual. It's talking about taxing any entity. So the federal government could not directly tax you as an individual or a state or any other entity directly unless it was somehow tied to the census or enumeration. The reason for this is because the style of taxation that was being created was that if the federal government needed money, tariffs absolutely were part of it and actually became a large part of it during the tariff war, during the era of good feeling, but that's a different discussion for another time. But aside from that, most of the funds that the federal government raised was from an income tax, not on the people, but on the states. The states paid income tax to the federal government, then the states taxed you otherwise. And it's saying here the federal government could not directly tax anybody, including the states, unless it was in proportion to the census or enumeration. So what does that mean? Well, in today's society, or should I say in today's day and age, California right now, for example, it's the state I live in, so this is the reason why I use it as an example. And I think this includes the illegal aliens, but I'm not sure, is 11.9% of the overall population of the United States. The way it's going to drop below 10% before I retire. But anyway, you know what you call a retired author and constitutionalist, Brady?
Dead? I don't know.
There you go. That's when I retire. Okay.
No, it's funny.
You're good. I didn't know if you were going to be able to do that one. That's good.
It's funny you mentioned California dropping and everything like that. Saw a very interesting little. I'll track this one down for you, but we had a census in 2020, and the first presidential election that we're going to see after that census is in 2024. The electoral map has shifted by about 6 or 7 votes, to the extent that a neutral Republican against a neutral Democrat should be favored by about like 273 to 266 or whatever the exact numbers are. The blue states keep losing electoral votes to the red states. And if it happens more this next decade, well, we've got this for 2024 and 2028, we will have presidential elections that favor the red states. That shift
That's
matters.
why they want desperately to get rid of the Electoral College.
That's one of many reasons. It's also why they cheated on the census.
Right.
There's probably New York and California and Illinois, all 3 should have lost another electoral vote. There should have been 3 more going elsewhere. But that's neither here nor there. But this kind of matters. It also tells you why they're going after
11% of the population of California. Yeah. So if California has 11.9% of the total population, then in the old way of doing the taxation, California would pay 11.9% of the federal budget if we were doing it the old way. That's how they did it. The states, however, when they were being taxed, it was different than it is today. When we see income tax, we think of IRS, and if you don't pay your taxes, you could be, there could be a lien, there could be arrest, and so on and so forth, because the government takes that money from us. They take our taxes because they directly tax us. How do you take the tax from a state, especially since the states, through their delegates, are the ones that created you? You don't take it. You request it. Whole different dynamic.
We're going to talk about the 17th Amendment or the 3/5 clause here, or was that for another time?
That's more or less for another time. I just want to lay this out so they understand why this clause is worded the way it is.
Well,
So-
let me just put it down. Just another
Sure.
way of saying that the bigger states got more representation by having more members of Congress, but at the same time, they had to pay for their right for that. They're a bigger state; they pay more in taxes, and it was kind of the trade-off between big states and small states, and that's why this made so much sense.
Right. So it says, now get back to, no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census numeration herein before directed to be taken. So a state would look at the budget, decide whether or not it's going to pay its share. Well, what would happen if a state didn't pay its share? Could the federal government arrest them? Could the federal government throw the state in jail? Put a lien on its property? No. So how would the federal government get to the state to give them their percentage of the budget that they were due to pay for the taxation? They would have to make the state willing to pay it. Well, how would they do that? By correcting the budget until it was satisfactory to those states that did not want to pay their share, to get them to be willing to pay it because it was adjusted, made more constitutional, perhaps.
Sounds like a compromise process to me.
Yeah, and I remember, I think his name is Ted Baer. He runs something called Movie Guide, and I had a lunch with Ted Baer and his wife. His wife has since passed away. I met Ted Baer again. Hadn't seen him in a long time. Last November in La Puente, and I was talking to him about this. And I'd had lunch with Ted Baer and his wife, and there was a couple other my friends, a local mover and shaker here in Temecula, and so on and so forth. And Ted Baer is a staunch Jeffersonian. His wife, a staunch Hamiltonian.
Ouch.
Oh, the conversation got interesting fast. And this subject came up, and she says, yeah, but Doug, there were states that weren't paying their, and you know someone's Hamiltonian when they word it this way, their fair share. So something had to be done to ensure that the federal government got the funds that it needed. And my first response was, there were states that weren't paying their share? That was the point. It was a way to keep the federal government honest, so to speak. It's funny because I was looking at a number today, which is this was fascinating to me. This is the time period we're in right now is only the second time in history that the national debt has exceeded the gross domestic product. It's only happened one other time in history. It was during World War II. As for federal spending in 1890s, prior to the 16th Amendment, which changed the taxation. So the taxation was being done the old way that I just talked about. Federal spending was between 3 and 4% of the gross domestic product. In 2007, a friend of mine and I did a deep dive study on the federal budget. And we determined at the time that 85% of federal spending is unconstitutional. And what we also realized was that the federal spending was at 23% of the GDP. I was curious what it is today. It's now 25% of the GDP. It has gone up 2%. This is a big deal. Federal spending is out of control. Why? Because they don't have to answer to anybody. With this old way of doing it, no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in the proportion to the census enumeration herein before directed to be taken. They had to answer to somebody. They could not spend their money without the state saying, yeah, okay, we're good with it.
No,
Go ahead.
If you run the government like a business, you can't spend more than you have in revenues. That should be how you do your budget. We ought to tell Congress, okay, we brought in $5 billion.
But you also can't spend money you're not supposed to spend.
Well, that
if
too.
you're running a business, right, and the people who are the executive board, or they're the managers, assistant managers, whatever, and they're buying things on the company credit card that have nothing to do with the business, we have a problem.
If you bring in $4 trillion of tax revenues, that should be your budget, period. And I'd love to see Congress actually wrangle this out. Instead of saying, I'm going to give so many hundreds of millions of dollars to a certain project, you've got to break it down. We're going to spend, we've got some mandatory spending because we're obligated to do certain things. And then, okay, I want to give 11% of the budget, however big that budget is, to defense. And if they take in more tax revenues, great. If you take in less tax revenues, the defense budget, takes a pay cut. That's how the budget should be done, is percentage-wise, not dollar amounts. What's interesting about that is they'd actually have to think long and hard about how to increase their tax revenues. And history has shown us that raising taxes does not increase your tax revenues. You know what does? Lowering taxes increases tax revenues because businesses expand and there's more income to tax.
Right. It creates more business, and more business, more income gets taxed.
Basic Reaganomics.
And the other problem when it comes to government also is there are automatic expenditure increases. A lot of these expenditures by government have an automatic each year increase. Well, it doesn't have to be voted for each time. That's just an automatic, and it's mandatory spending.
The other thing doing it my way does is it gets rid of a lot of the earmark process. Because let's say you've got, I don't know, give me a constitutional department. Some sort of thing that makes sense to do. Watch the different
department.
Yeah. Okay. So watch the different elements of the State Department, or let's go with the defense. You got the different elements of the Defense Department. Instead of each one of them saying give us billions of more each year, they're going to have to argue against each other for their percentage of the total defense pie. Now, those are arguments I want to see happen because they're going to be whittling away at each other's wasteful programs, saying you don't need this, you don't need that, and you're going to see a lot less waste in the government. So we do the budget backwards. It needs to be fixed.
Well, and the thing is, these people believe that the money is never ending. Besides, what do we care? It's not our money. I remember I worked for a city for a while, and I realized that the service that the city was buying all of its administrative products, supplies from, was charged them a lot more than other places. In fact, they were paying more for the products from the store than what the products cost if you walked into the store. And in fact, they were also paying, this particular store charged more for its products than one of the big corporate companies like Staples. So I did an analysis. I figured out, what it would cost if we did it certain ways. And I presented this to my boss, and I was told, and I quote, yeah, but we've always bought from this company. We're not going to change now. Who cares? It's not our money.
Ouch.
I think that was one of the reasons why I had the difficulties I was there, among other things. I know this might be shocking to you, but I was creating a lot of waves while I was working for that city, and they got to the point where they're trying to find a way to get rid of me because I was a problem. Partly also because I disagreed with my job. My job was the business tax. Yeah, it got ugly really fast. I'm not going to go into the details of the story, but let's just say I got crucified, so to speak. But the reason why I bring all this up is because the way to stop bad spending is there has to be someone to answer to and give approval that has a very big stake in the game. The state legislatures have a big stake in the game. And they were the ones deciding whether or not to pay their state's portion of that income tax. And if the federal government says, well, we're not going to change it. Well, it's unconstitutional. We're not going to pay it. You're not going to get your money. Okay, fine. We'll change it. We need to get something. That's the way it worked out. It gave the states oversight over federal spending. It's gone. 16th Amendment got rid of that.
17th Amendment too. They worked hand in hand.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Let's go on to the next one. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. That one is basically just saying this. The days of you states having so much autonomy that you are battling with each other over commerce and things like that, we're a country now. We're a union. You're not going to do that to each other, and the federal government can't encourage it either or do it. So any items exported from a state, which is going to be to another state, because the only people that can export from the state, from the country to another country is the federal government. So we're talking between states here. There's not going to be any tax or duty. Commerce between the states does not the federal government is not allowed to put a tax on that. If product between state and what we learn with the Commerce Clause is, unless there's a dispute, it's pretty much none of the federal government's business. There'll be no duty, there'll be no tax, there'll be no regulations. Let it flow between states.
One of the,
because you're all part of a union.
And I get the reasoning behind it, because we know about the tariff wars between the states after the Articles of Confederation. That's the whole impetus behind this. But what this has done is, we live in a system today that is dominated by cartels and monopolies. And one of the thoughts that's out there that I think is worth at least considering is, if you want to keep business local or make it harder to create a monopoly, you should have a small tariff for each state line you cross. If you're a big producer or something, that encourages local businesses to compete with the quote unquote foreign or out of state business. And the same thing should be done on an international standpoint. These so-called free traders and the free trade deals those are crony capitalists. They're trying to carve out regulations and stuff like that to benefit the favored cartel corporations. But this system that we have in place right now absolutely favors big business over small. So, which is something that needs to be addressed. So this is a clause that, if in a proposed Article 5 convention, I would like to see discussed, or at least see some good economists really take a look at how can we empower local businesses over the multinationals or the monopolies. So it's a thought I haven't shared with you before, but
this is the first time I've heard it. Yeah,
I've been bouncing that one around in my head for quite some time, and how to see how it balances. How that does that make sense constitutionally? Is it something that could be done? I know it makes sense economically.
Well, the states really could not put in place protectionist tariffs or clauses to protect their interstate commerce. That's what was going on under the Articles of Confederation, and it was causing the commerce between the states to bog down. The idea here is we want commerce to flow freely between the states. That's the reason why the word regulate was used in the Commerce Clause.
Yeah, and I would say it's just a small tariff, but the problem with what was going on back then is the tariffs were indiscriminate and arbitrary, and they were not uniform. So if it's uniform and no state has an advantage over the other, and it's just put in place on a uniform basis, flat level, does it make sense to encourage local business over, out of state?
I agree that we want to do things to encourage local business, to encourage intrastate commerce. But on the same token, interstate commerce also is, an important concept. And regardless of how states will operate to encourage such activity, it's none of the federal government's business, number one. And number two, the states can't also, like the federal government, can't charge tariffs. There has to be another way.
Well, yeah, let's talk. Let's bounce that one around.
But I do get what you're saying.
Yeah, when I see the downside to what I'm saying as well, and I understand it's possibly a slippery slope, but if there's another solution, I'm all ears.
Sure. And that's the thing about it. But it's interesting because the term slippery slope, when you look at politics and the relationships between entities such as states, counties, countries, whatever, everything is a slippery slope potentially. When you have tyrants, dirtbags, crooks, and all of that wanting to do what they do, they will always find a way to find their loophole or to manipulate. Everything's a slippery slope, just not because it's a slippery slope, but because of human nature. And so the idea here is to try to write a constitution that guards against those shortfalls of human nature as much as possible.
Yeah, and the thing that was going on back there in the 1780s was, for example, you could have a manufacturer, I don't know, call them wagons in New Jersey that could export to several states, and those states have their own wagon manufacturers, and to protect their own domestic manufacturers, they were just penalizing New Jersey with like a 40% or abusive tariff. And that was halting trade, and that was a big problem. But it also opened up corruption because, who decides what the tariff each state was putting on? That would have been, the people closest to the government, the rich, these companies, and they were, basically bribing the politicians to put a tariff on to protect their own business. It was money well spent. The same thing's happening today. The same thing happens every day in DC with regulations. These are all problems.
I apologize for the crinkling of what sounded like a bag. Doggies want a treat, so
priorities.
Hey, I think that's why they hang out in my office so much. They give them treats every once in a while. But way to a dog's heart is through its stomach, right? But anyway, all right. So we are getting close to the end, like a minute, and so we'll stop here. But I think this was all good conversation. Hopefully, you learned something, and we'll pick up on the preference or lack thereof of one port over another. We'll see how that goes next week. Any closing comments?
No, good show, and I liked your pink shirt, and look forward to seeing you in a couple more shows this week. It's going to be an exciting week in the news, so we'll have a lot to talk about if we're together on Friday and definitely on Sunday.
Yeah, there's well, let's just say that this morning it was hard to get the Constitution class willing to talk about the Constitution. We didn't get the Constitution until about half an hour into the class because there was so many questions, comments, and all that. And then on top of that, the topic was the 25th Amendment, which just made all kinds more fun. 25th Amendment being, if for those of you who pay attention, has within it a clause that allows for the removal of the president from his presidential duties if he's found incompetent, things like that. Oh, excuse me. So, you guys are wiping me out. I'm over here yawning. But it was a good class in Fallbrook. I've got one in San Juan Capistrano tonight. And I always look forward to talking to you folks here. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all that everybody does, the support. I am getting ready to enter a final phase of fundraising. The show that I host on KMET 1490 AM. The new contract is coming up in less than 2 weeks, and we've got to raise a significant amount of money. So I'm putting it out there that if you want to help keep the KMET program funded, please give happily and and not sparingly. You go to douglasvgibbs.com or politicalpistachio.com. Hit the donate button. In the near future, I will be changing my the merchant processing, but at the moment I have what I have. If you would like to do it by Venmo or Zelle, get a hold of me, constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com, or I believe I've got a page somewhere. I'll have to put it out there, maybe on Political Pistachio, to show how you can do that. Otherwise, through my websites, the handler right now is PayPal. Once again, I'm working on changing that.
And I might be having a couple of conversations this week towards those endeavors, and I will update you on that pretty soon once I have those conversations.
All right. So that all said, see you next show. United we stand. Combined we kick butt. God bless America. God bless you. Politicalpistachio.com, douglasvgibbs.com. One last quick word. My latest book, Repeal Democracy. You've got to have it. I explain the difference chapter by chapter between democracy and republic and why it's so important. We need to be a republic. Democracy is our problem. But you got to read the book to understand that. I have had now students in a number of classes say to the classes, holy cow, that was such a great book. Everybody, you got to buy one. I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to make a buck. It's because this book is a labor of love. I want people to understand what the difference between a republic and democracy is and why it's so important we restore the republic. So check out Repeal Democracy. If you can't find it, go to politicalpistachio.com. On the right-hand sidebar, you'll see it just a little bit way down, that picture, and it'll go to the site to buy it. All right. Thank you for being here. Do you want to plug yourself at all, Mr. Hamster?
No, I think everybody here knows where to find my channels by now. But I do want to ask everybody to say prayers for our good friend Ron Partain, and good luck with the surgery tomorrow. Cheers.
Very good. All right. Bye-bye now.